Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another live stream. My name is Ram. I'll be your host today, and this one is a stream that I thought of uh, very late. There hasn't been a lot of opportunity for me to think about or empathize with a lot of the audience, and sometimes it's just been uh, you know let's uh, let's do something and uh, let's talk to people about specific security technologies and things like that. But this time I thought I should sit down and try and actually tell people what it is that the OpenSSF does and how they do it and why they do it, and uh, discuss with people about what their impressions are of the OpenSSF and honestly what they think about it, and give people an opportunity to learn about the OpenSSF, um, starting from what OpenSSF stands for. So volunteering in this sort of uh, difficult task is Manish. Say hi to Manish, everyone. Hello, Manish.
Hello, hello.
Manish joins us from amidst the beautiful Himalayas in Nepal. Where specifically are you joining us from today, Manish?
I'm from the city Kathmandu.
Yeah, okay. So I met Manish at a recent DevOps Days Kathmandu event. He works on DevOps and security and all of these fun things. And yeah, like I said, he sort of volunteered himself into this difficult position today. Manish, do you want to quickly introduce yourself to our audience first?
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's me, Manish Adhikari. I'm from Nepal, and I have completed my bachelor, and I have been working as a DevOps engineer and doing lots of research on the basis of a security, how we can implement in the DevOps. So, as much as I will like to get a new knowledge from him. So I have joined this session to know a lot about the OpenSSF, which will be very beneficial for me and my future tech. Thank you.
Cool. Um, so have you, let's start with this. Have you heard of the OpenSSF before?
Yeah, I did some research. So it is a security basis open source where people from the different community gives their opinion on the basis of security, how we can implement in the open source softwares.
Yeah, sounds about right.
So that's what my explore. Now I want to hear from you as much I can learn from you.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not far from the truth. The OpenSSF is part of the Linux Foundation, and at the Linux Foundation, there's tons of projects, and wherever there's a lot of open source code, there's open source security issues. So the OpenSSF was formulated a few years ago, um, and the idea is to maintain a vendor neutral home for specific security aspects around various projects. So yeah, that's like a very quick introduction about the OpenSSF. What's your experience with open source, though? The reason I ask is it's easier for me to make the story relatable if I know um, what your open source leanings are.
So, as per the question, in the field of open source, you can take me as a very beginner. Whether I have worked there, some kind of open source software, like maybe it's not open source, DevOps activities.
Hmm.
So in that case, I may be some kind of a mid experience.
Got it. So, I'm not necessarily saying are you a consumer, even if you're a consumer of open source. Like I use, I don't know, Linux, or I use Kubernetes at work, or I use some other open source software. I don't know. So, I'm sure you've consumed some open source software at
Yeah,
various points and things like that, right? So
yeah,
most of
yes.
us are like that. We might all not necessarily be contributors. A lot of us might just be consumers, for
Consumer.
example.
Okay.
So any sort of any particular software that comes to mind um, when I say what open source software do you consume a lot?
So as like told before that in my field as a DevOps, so I have to use a lot like a Linux platform for that and uh, Docker, Kubernetes, and other related tools.
Hmm.
In the
Right.
security,
Um, so here's the thing. When you use open source software, what can happen is there might be some security that you're not aware of. There might be some security issues that you need help with. There might be, not there might be, I think there will be some security um, vulnerabilities that get discovered in some other part of the world but not necessarily communicated to you. And
okay,
same goes with you might have certain vulnerabilities which you may or may not know how to fix, but then somebody else does, but you don't know how to get in touch with them, or you don't know how to derive their work and apply it to you, things like that. So there's a fundamentally there the discovery of solutions in the security space might or might not exist, and there are like a thousand problems like that about security in the open source space that don't necessarily get worked on.
yeah,
So the OpenSSF is sort of responsible for this gap and make sure that this gap is plugged. Uh, and therefore, all of the aspects of security, especially for open source software, is addressed in some form or the other.
okay. How does OpenSSF work with open source communities and projects?
Now, that's a good question. There's many channels for how the OpenSSF interacts with specific communities. I'll give you examples of like one or two. Um, there was this um, there was this initiative called the Alpha Omega Initiative, and what they did as part of Alpha Omega was they put out a certain quantum of funding where they would fund an engineer to work on specific issues for specific open source tools. I know of two places where they successfully completed work like that. So the first one that I know of was with the Rust Foundation. So Rust, as you know, is a popular. Rust, as you know, is like an open source language, right? So it's owned by the Rust Foundation, basically. So the Rust programming language had some very um, how do I say, very gnarly and deep type safety issues and memory safety issues. So it was a big priority for the community to get those fixed, but they didn't necessarily have sufficient funding in order to find and fund engineers who will work on these specific initiatives. So the OpenSSF, through the Alpha Omega program, put some money into that, and they helped the Rust Foundation work on this.
Okay.
Similarly, there were donations made through Alpha Omega, which is again one of the OpenSSF initiatives, to invest some money that can go into the Python Software Foundation, for example. And they hired a person to work full time in resolving Python security issues. And a third example was the Eclipse Foundation. So there's this whole notion called software supply chain security, which has started to become like a big thing for open source consumers and things like that. And so the OpenSSF has worked with the Eclipse Foundation in order to improve their security posture, essentially, and do better supply chain security. So the best way to work with the OpenSSF is through, I mean, demonstrated successes through these foundations, and getting them to take a look at your project and seeing if some funding opportunity opens up, and plugging the holes either through paying maintainers or finding some engineers to actually do something.
Okay. Can you say what are the some most common security risks in OpenSSF today?
So there's many areas that the OpenSSF works with. So I'll just give you I'll show you a few things about what they actually work on. So it's more clear. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes.
So the OpenSSF website is openssf.org. Um, I should have probably said this in the beginning, but OpenSSF stands for Open Source Security Foundation. So the open is just open, and then Open Source Security Foundation. So there's S, S, and F. SSF stands for Source Security Foundation. So the way the OpenSSF works is there's two, three different kinds of activity that constantly happen. There's bringing the community together and doing a lot of the wrangling around building and maintaining a community, etc. And then there's educating the community constantly about, here's some security issues, here's how to fix them, here's how we approach certain kinds of security, etc. And then there's the whole thing about having projects, so which is like being the, like I said, vendor neutral home for a lot of the projects that they host. So projects are a big part of the OpenSSF and what they do. So they use a lot of these projects um, to tackle certain specific security issues. So, for example, Scorecard, which is one of my favorite projects in the ecosystem because it's just, so convenient and so easy to use. And Scorecard basically attaches itself to any uh, GitHub repo, for example, and then Scorecard will say how good or bad your repo actually is. So, as somebody who consumes open source, you can go check out the repo and say, okay, this is a secure repository for me to use, or this is a very unsecure repository for me to use. I can't use it at all. So, whatever you think of, you can always make a decision based on what scores you receive from scorecard. So projects like these are a very fundamental part of um, the OpenSSF, and that's mainly how they, keep their work active and things like that.
Okay. How do they prioritize the security issue?
So the OpenSSF by itself doesn't, work on specific priorities and things like that. Um, so there's a couple of areas where the OpenSSF is invested in security at large. So there's a lot of work that they do with U.S. governments, government agencies, and with the United Nations and things like that. And then there's a bunch of things that they do in EU. That hopefully in future there'll be like some stuff they do as part of the subcontinent as well. But at the moment, it's focused on like the US and the EU, where there's a massive policy framework in place about digital assets and open source and cybersecurity and things like that. And the OpenSSS sort of cuts across all of these different areas and sits at the intersection, so to say. And so right now, some of the big priorities are participating in what is known as the Cyber Resilience Act of the EU, and then also working with like the government, the US government, sorry, on what they can do in terms of advancing policy and open source and keeping that open source safe and things like that. So these are two very broad umbrella sort of areas that the foundation is invested in uh, as work. So these might not necessarily be individual CVEs, for example, and fixes and things like that, but it's a much broader brushstroke in terms of what kind of security work they're doing.
Okay. So for the beginners, um, is there any open source tools or project that can be explored?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. There are so many tools and projects. So I'll show you this. So if you go to the openssf.org page, you see all these people waving. Past that, here on top, there's a projects menu. So here you can check all of the projects. So the way I like to think about it is there's a software development life cycle, right? So there's writing code on the one hand, and then there's building it into an artifact, things like that, and then there's deploying it and keeping it in production, etc. And then there's so many stages in between all of this, where this sort of uh, build and deploy life cycle repeats itself. Now, the I like to think of it as the OpenSSF has a project for every single one of these stages and more. So there's, as you can see, there's like so many different projects. All of these are open source. I'll take like a minute to go through all of them very quickly, so that it makes some sense as you start working through it. Much like other foundations, the OpenSSF follows like a sandbox incubation graduation sort of flow for all of their projects. But it's basically like all of them are open source, all of them are free for you to explore. You can check them out and do things. So there's one set of tools that focus on code, which is like the first step. So if you've written some code, um, there are a couple of projects that will go in, that will check your code and showcase how certain best practices and certain vulnerabilities or certain scanning stuff and all. So it's a combination of some static scans, and then some dynamic scans as well, and then all of that will result in like a numerical score or some kind of alerts and things like that. So all star, for example, is like, it's on GitHub. It will take a look at your source code, and then it will tell you um, how well or how badly your code is performing overall, and how good or bad your code base is in terms of what the problem is. Here's how you can fix it, and here's where it occurs in the code, that sort of thing. Very similar to scorecards, which we saw in some manner. And so the combination of scorecards and baseline, which is another project that's being worked on, it will provide like, here's the minimum that you need to do in terms of being secure and being resilient and keeping your code clean, and your your adherence to certain best practices, etc. So these 3 4 projects will really help in that early stage of, here I am writing code, can how good or bad this is. Okay. And then you sort of move a little up the order, where you go past the coding or the programming phase of things into, um, I want to start building and I want to start deploying, and here's how I do ops and things like that. So there's things that you do, like Git tough, for example, is it marries the Git protocol that you have with certain best practices that are a part of a very old the update framework or tough project, and then it'll help you set very crucial permissions and things like that, so that a lot of attacks that happen to, um, through exfiltration of your secrets, exfiltration of your project information, etc., doesn't happen or doesn't recur and things like that. So that's the sort of next stage, in my opinion, where after you've written code, a lot of things sit around in the periphery of your code, and there's some open source OpenSSF projects that sit there. The next stage is building your code into an artifact, and the big thing there are these things known as S bombs, or software bill of materials. Oftentimes, and I'm sure you've experienced this, when you use containers, what happens is you don't necessarily know everything that's inside your container. So there might
Yeah.
be pieces of the final container image that gets deployed that you don't necessarily have awareness about. And so the OpenSSF has certain projects that will help in that area, and it will help people add that kind of important security by specifying all of the things that have gone into certain builds, and being able to create a whole system around the information about a build, and making people aware of, okay, here's what's inside this image, and here's what's inside these containers, etc. So if you're deploying like a fleet of 50 containers, then it can tell you equivocally what's inside every single one of them, which is very critical in terms of visibility and awareness. And so there's projects that can help you do that. And then once you build this information about various projects, you have to process them in some way. So you can create policies, for example, and you can tell how you want certain things deployed, and then um, you can keep all of this information in graphs, for example. And so there's so many projects that help with that. So guac, for example, is a very popular project within the OpenSSF, for the reason that there's a lot of data generated about builds, for example, and nobody knows what to do with them. So guac provides that uh, critical functionality of automation, and creating representations of how different pieces within, let's say, a container image are related, and how certain libraries and dependencies are formed. And so it provides all of that information contextually, so people can make informed decisions about what is wrong with a certain code base, just by knowing what has gone into them, for example. So again, a lot of stuff around S bombs and data formats, etc. And so the other thing I wanted to highlight are stuff having to do with, here's an image, and how do I verify that it's right? So code signing, or adding signatures to images is a very important piece of the security puzzle. It helps validate who's doing something. And so there's concepts known as attestations and provenance in the world of security. Attestations are about proving that the immutable artifact in question is in fact made from a genuine source. And so that proves that it comes from a genuine source, and so that's the provenance of the artifact. So it tells people where certain things came from, and who's responsible for building them, and where was it built, etc. And so you can add signatures to communicate that and build that kind of trust. Um, and so in addition to this thing called salsa here, it's very important to secure not just the code that you write and what you put out, but also where it gets built and how it gets built, and make sure you communicate that information. And that is the functionality that Salsa provides. And so, like I said, in every single piece of the software development lifecycle, there's some open SSF project that can sit and help you. And again, all of these are open source. You can check them out. They're all linked from this project page under all projects. I'll open one, for example. So if you go to scorecard, there is a landing page that explains what scorecard is, but also there's enough information to take you to the actual scorecard repo on GitHub, and point to all the documentation and all of the information that is required for you to start using scorecard in your projects. So that's about some of the projects, like a very very short introduction, to be honest. But obviously each of these are quite detailed. Sigstore is our only graduated project at the moment. We have a handful that are incubating, and another handful that are in the sandbox. Obviously there's like a pre-sandbox stage as well. Not sure what they'd call it, but yeah, it's it's available.
So how does it ensures that its recommended and standards are adapted on their ecosystem?
Uh-huh, that's right.
How they ensure?
So it falls on the engineers to make sure that people are following certain things. Let's see. For example, there's the TensorFlow project. I think it's very popular in the world right now. And if you look at it, um, here is an OpenSSF scorecard score. Here is an OpenSSF best practices badge. So it's incumbent on the engineers that are working on these code bases to use these tools. The OpenSSF doesn't force or enforce certain things on these communities, but I think communities that want to secure things and you know keep their code bases secure and want to communicate this sense of security to any potential downstream users, then the OpenSSF has ways. So I guess there's like an old adage, God helps those who help themselves, or something like that. So if you're open to being secure, the OpenSSF provides certain frameworks for you to be able to do that. Um, and for example, like this information is publicly available, where you can go in and take a look at all of the different checks that scorecard has, and this is linked from your repo, and it'll provide what the problems are. For example, this is pin dependencies are a problem, and so it'll give you details about where the problem is, and in your individual scan it'll tell you where it can be fixed as well. So it'll point you to the documentation about um, how to fix this, and where to look for a fix, etc. And then, like, static analysis is also a part of this check. And so um, the reason there's no uh, 10 on 10 score, for example, for static analysis, is because static analysis tool was not run on all commits for this repo. So it will tell you why there are problems, and obviously the documentation will show you how you can fix it and things like that. So this is an example of how you can make use of things to improve your scores, for example. Oops, sorry. So that's how enforcement happens. It's not like somebody at the OpenSSF is looking at all of these and saying, "Hey, do this or do that." It provides all of the foundational aspects that are necessary, and then it's like I said, it's incumbent on uh, engineers working on the project, or people in the community working on the project, to make sure that it adheres to the best practices, etc.
So it's like contribute.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So how can OpenSSF projects benefits from the smaller open source project?
How do we benefit from what? I mean,
I mean, how can a smaller open source project benefit from what open source offers?
so the OpenSSF is always available to make projects more secure. For example, if you're a smaller project and you want to project security, for example, the best way to do it is to try and adopt certain open source OpenSSF best practices for the open source code base. And being secure is important, not just having like tons and tons of features and playing around with them, etc. And so if smaller projects want to be and want to showcase more security, I guess they can start adopting things from the OpenSSF. That's a good place to start.
Okay, that's great. So, what would you suggest? Which one should a beginner use?
Yeah, so I'm kind of glad you asked. Um, so one of the things at the OpenSSF is tons and tons of courses. So education is a big part of the OpenSSF, and we take it very seriously. So there's a one, two, three, four, five, six, seven courses around open source and security, etc. And I would say start with LFT 121. So and all the seven are free courses. These are all provided as part of the Linux Foundation training. If you don't know, Linux Foundation has a massive training um, repertoire of courses, and some of them are paid, but a lot of them are free as well. And so the OpenSSF has hosted all of its training material as part of the LF training stuff. And uh, there's a lot of courses that take you from the very basics of how you approach security for open source, and then build to different kinds of understanding. So for example, there is a scorecard specific course, there's a sig store specific course. But then there's also stuff like here's how you do better supply chain security with SBOMs and signatures. So it all sort of builds up into more courses, and the idea is you have an understanding of security, you have an understanding of open source um, at the end of it. So you might start as an absolute beginner to security, and you might start as an absolute beginner to open source, but nonetheless, as you start exploring the course and things like that, more information becomes available to you. And that is where I would recommend that anybody new to all of this start.
Okay, that's great to start for the beginner.
So I think that's a good CTA, and I'd like to pause here. This is obviously a lot of information for people who are watching remotely. So yeah, unless you had further questions, I think we can stop here. Um, Obviously, in terms of resources, there's the openssf.org website. There's the OpenSSF YouTube channel where a lot of great content gets posted all the time. So I would say, check us out on YouTube and um, s- subscribe. I guess, but I don't want to sound like a TikToker or an Instagram. Say, smash that
No.
subscribe button or whatever. But I think if you're interested in like security topics and things like that, start there. Obviously we have like a Slack, etc., which you can join. All of it is linked from the openssf.org website. There's a lot of projects that require help, so you can consider OpenSSF a good place to start with your open source contributions that requires a lot of help. So take a look at all of the different projects and the working groups. Um, I'll tell you this: there's stuff that's as boring as like security stuff, drill downs that happen, but there's also like AI and security, which I think is a big draw for people, as it is that anything AI is better than anything regular, I guess. But there's also like a lot of AI security conversations that are going on that people can start to, speak about and participate in, and um, share thoughts basically. So what I'd love for people to do is obviously take the courses and speak to people and things like that, but also take a look at all of the work that's going on in various working groups and things like that, and see where you can participate. So um, a lot of open source work is you know less glamorous. We're always looking for contributors, and it'll be wonderful to have more and more people participate from the community, especially if you're a practitioner and you consume open source and you want it to be a little more secure.
Okay, as a contributor, so people do lots of a thing. So by giving a small contribute uh, in a big project, that can be a good choice.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, that's great. I think I understand many more about the open source. So
Yeah.
I will be contributing in this field from
Hmm.
to in the different open source softwares.
Sure. Yeah, that I look forward to it. But I guess that's all we had for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you so much, Manish, for taking the time and participating from again the beautiful uh, valleys of Nepal. I, I live in a tropical part of the world. We live next to the ocean, so I don't get to see mountains at all. And every time I visit Kathmandu, I'm fascinated. It's like I can't get enough of the mountains and the views and things like that. So yeah,
So
great.
it's my pleasure that you called me and to do a live stream about and talk about OpenSSF. So it was a great opportunity for me to gain a new knowledge. So from today onwards, I will be a contributor in the open source. So thank you for having me in this live stream.
Hey, absolutely, man. Thank you so much for making the time. We have a few more streams coming up. So, our next stream is on the 3rd of June. That one's about a very specific open source tool that helps around security. It's called Cryptic and it's made by Tarun. Who decided to open source it, and so he's going to showcase a few nifty things about how it can do some network security stuff. And then the week after that, I'm going to try and do my first in-person live stream. So lots of firsts this time. What I mean by in-person is, so far all of my guests have been remote, but I might do. I'm planning to do one with another person in the same room, and I don't know how that's going to work out, but we won't know until we've tried, right? So I'm going to try that. That's on the 15th of June, or the 14th of June, the Saturday. So I'll you know follow the OpenSSF socials. We'll post all the information there. We'd love to see you as part of the audience then as well.
Okay,
But thank you
I
so
will.
much for, yes, Manish,
Okay, I will be joining in that day too as
for sure.
audience.
Yeah,
To
thanks.
okay.
Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. See you soon.